I had believed before the war that cold was simply the absence of warmth. I understood differently now. Cold was a presence, a living thing that inhabited the ruins of Stalingrad like another invading army. It crept through the holes in my padded jacket, the telegrika that had seemed so thick in September, and settled in my bones with patient malice. My name was Dmitry Volkov. I was 20 years old. I had once worked the furnaces at the Red October steel factory, 3 kilometers north of where I now crouched in the shattered remains of what might have been a school. The wind carried ash and snow in equal measure through the broken windows. I pressed myself against the frozen brick wall, my Mosin Nagant rifle clutched in hands I could no longer fully feel. The fingerless gloves I'd taken from a dead German last week, guilt and gratitude mixing in my chest as I'd stripped them from stiffening hands, did little against the January cold. I flexed my fingers constantly, terrified they would freeze to the rifle's metal, terrified more that they would become too numb to pull the trigger when the moment demanded. Outside, the city groaned. That was the only word for the sound Stalingrad made now. A low, perpetual groan of tortured metal and settling rubble, punctuated by the crack of rifles and the thunder of artillery. Sometimes I couldn't tell if the rumbling came from the guns or from my own empty stomach. We'd eaten nothing but thin kasha for 3 days, and before that, a dead horse we'd found frozen in a courtyard, its flesh grey and stringy but precious beyond measure. "Volkov," whispered Sergeant Orlov from somewhere to my left. I couldn't see him in the gloom, but I knew his voice, rough as boot leather, aged beyond his 30 years by this grinding siege. Movement. Southwest corner, 2nd floor of the apartment block. I shifted my position slowly, ignoring the protest of muscles that had been tensed for hours. The apartment block, he meant, was a skeletal thing, its facade torn away to reveal rooms like empty eye sockets. I'd lived in a building much like it before the war, when Stalingrad had been a city of life and purpose. My family, mother, father, younger sister Katya, had occupied 2 rooms on the 4th floor of a workers' housing complex. I'd slept on the floor near the stove, grateful for its warmth, dreaming of the day I might earn enough for my own room, perhaps even marry Nadezhda from the textile factory. I didn't let myself think about whether they'd evacuated across the Volga before the Germans came. I didn't let myself imagine the alternatives. Through the scope of my rifle, a privilege of being one of the better shots in what remained of our company, I scanned the ruined apartments. There, a flicker of movement, the distinct shape of a German helmet. Stahlhelm, they called it. I'd learned to recognize its profile in my sleep, that cruel angular shape that haunted my dreams when exhaustion finally dragged me under. "I see him," I breathed, barely voicing the words. "Hold," Orlov commanded. "Wait for the others." This was the mathematics of survival we'd learned. 1 German shot meant a sniper team, meant a firefight, meant calling attention to our position. Better to watch, to wait, to gather intelligence. We were 13 men holding this sector of the factory district. 13 out of the 40 who'd been here when I'd arrived in November. We couldn't afford to spend ourselves on single targets. I watched the German through my scope. He was young, perhaps my age, his face obscured by the scarf wrapped around his neck and chin. He moved carefully through the exposed room, probably thinking himself hidden in the ruins. I could kill him. The range was perhaps 150 meters, and I'd made harder shots. My finger rested outside the trigger guard, discipline learned through bitter necessity. I imagined the bullet's path, the way his body would crumple, the way his comrades would scramble and search for our position. And then what? More would come. They always came. "More," hissed Private Yakov from my right, young voice tight with fear and cold. 3 more. Ground floor. A patrol then. My heart quickened, sending precious warmth through my chest for a brief moment. 4 Germans, moving through the ruins with the confidence of men who believed they'd nearly won this battle. Perhaps they were right. The front line shifted daily, sometimes hourly, in this landscape of broken stone and frozen corpses. We held the factory district by threads and stubbornness, supplied by boats that braved German fire to cross the Volga, reinforced by troops who often died before learning their comrades' names. I'd learned not to befriend the new arrivals. The calculus was too painful. "Volkov," Orlov said, his voice carrying the weight of decision. "You take the scout. 2nd floor, when I give the word." I nodded, though he couldn't see me in the darkness. My mouth was dry despite the cold, despite the snow I'd melted and drunk from my canteen. This moment before action was always the same. Time stretched and compressed simultaneously, the world narrowing to the scope's circle, to the target's movements, to the rhythm of my own breath. I thought of Father, who'd taught me to shoot rabbits in the countryside when I was 12. "Steady breath, Dima," he'd said, using the diminutive that made me feel both childish and loved. "The rifle is merely an extension of your intention. Be certain of your purpose, and your hand will be steady." My purpose now was survival. My purpose was to hold this position for another hour, another day, until the relief that might never come. My purpose was to kill this young German before he killed me, or Orlov, or Yakov, or any of the others whose names I tried not to learn. The Germans moved methodically through the ruins, checking corners, maintaining intervals. Professional soldiers, probably veterans of the advance through Ukraine and the drive to the Volga. They'd learned caution in this city of sudden death, where every window might hide a rifleman, every cellar a group of defenders, every pile of rubble a mine or booby trap. "Steady," Orlov whispered, as much to himself as to us. I centered the crosshairs on the scout's chest. At this range, I aimed for the body mass. No room for the vanity of headshots. Through the scope, I could see details that would haunt me later. The way frost clung to his collar, the careful placement of his boots on the unstable rubble, the MP-40 submachine gun held ready across his chest. A good soldier, a man who probably had his own Nadezhda waiting in Berlin or Munich, or some small farm village whose name I'd never know. Now, the word released me. I exhaled half a breath and squeezed the trigger. The Mosin Nagant kicked against my shoulder with familiar violence, the report deafening in the confined space. Through the scope, I saw the German jerk backward, his rifle falling, his body crumpling exactly as I'd imagined. Then chaos. The other Germans dove for cover, their training instant and efficient. Orlov's rifle cracked beside me, and one of the ground floor soldiers spun and fell. Return fire shattered what remained of the window frames, bullets whining off brick and stone. I worked the bolt, the action smooth from countless repetitions, and searched for another target. "Conserve ammunition," Orlov shouted over the gunfire. "Aimed shots only." I found a German firing from behind a chunk of concrete. Only his helmet and rifle were visible, but he was shooting blind, spraying bullets in our general direction. I waited, patient as a hunter, until he shifted position to advance. 3 seconds of exposure. I fired, missed. The bullet sparking off stone, worked the bolt, fired again. This time he dropped, and I felt nothing. The numbness that had started in my fingers had spread to someplace deeper. Some place that had once contained the boy who'd worried about asking Nadezhda to the cinema. The firefight lasted perhaps 5 minutes, though time lost meaning in combat. When silence finally settled over the ruins, a temporary fragile silence, 2 Germans were dead, and 2 had retreated into the labyrinth of destruction. We'd expended 11 rounds and revealed our position. "We move," Orlov commanded. 5 minutes to gather ammunition and equipment, then we fall back to position 7. We emerge from our hiding places like specters, 13 gaunt men in mismatched uniforms and coats salvaged from the dead. I moved quickly to the scout I'd killed, trying not to look at his face as I searched his body. A half loaf of bread in his pack. I nearly wept at the sight of it. Ammunition for weapons we didn't carry. A letter, unfinished, the German words meaningless to me except for the name at the top. Meine liebste Anna, my dearest Anna. I left the letter in his pocket. Even in this place, some violations felt too profound. Yakov was searching the other body, his young hands. He was only 17, lied about his age to enlist, trembling as he worked. "Volkov," he called softly. "He's still breathing." I moved to his side. The German I'd shot lay crumpled against rubble, blood spreading dark across his Feldgrau uniform. His eyes were open, glazed with shock and pain, his breath coming in shallow gasps that steamed in the frozen air. He couldn't have been older than 19. "Leave him," Orlov said, not unkindly. "We can't spare the bullet, and we can't take prisoners." This was the mercy of Stalingrad. We left him to freeze, to bleed out slowly in the ruins of a city neither of us had known 6 months ago. I looked into his eyes for a moment and saw my own fear reflected there. Then I turned away and continued searching for anything useful, anything that might keep us alive another day. We moved through the ruins like ghosts, navigating by memory and instinct, through streets that no longer existed in any recognizable form. The city I'd known, the wide boulevards, the proud factories, the Volga embankment where Nadezhda and I had walked on summer evenings, was gone. In its place was a landscape of nightmare, buildings reduced to facades and fragments, the ground churned by artillery into a frozen moonscape, corpses frozen in grotesque positions where they'd fallen weeks or months ago. Position 7 was a basement in the factory district, partially collapsed but still defensible. We filed in through a narrow gap in the rubble, descending into darkness that smelled of damp stone and the lingering chemical tang of explosives. Someone had a candle, its weak light revealing our faces. Hollow-eyed, frostbitten, aged beyond our years. "First watch in 2 hours," Orlov announced, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Volkov, Mikhailov, you're first. Everyone else, rest while you can." Rest. The word was almost laughable. I found a corner where the ceiling seemed stable, wrapped myself in the German coat I'd scavenged 2 weeks ago, and closed my eyes. Sleep came despite everything, driven by exhaustion that transcended mere tiredness. But the dreams came too. I was back in the factory, before the war, before the Wehrmacht had crossed the border in June of 1941. The furnaces roared with purpose, and I was feeding them scrap metal, my face slick with honest sweat, my muscles aching with the good pain of productive labor. The foreman was telling a joke I couldn't quite hear over the industrial thunder. Someone was laughing. Nadezhda was waiting for me outside, her dark hair catching the evening light, her smile the center of a world that made sense. Then the furnaces began to scream, and the scrap metal became bodies, and Nadezhda's smile twisted into the frozen grimace of a corpse, and I was falling through darkness, while something with the voice of artillery called my name. "Volkov, wake up, your watch." I opened my eyes to Mikhailov's weathered face, to the dim candlelight of the basement, to the reality that no amount of sleep could escape. My body ached with cold that had settled so deep I'd forgotten what warmth felt like. I dragged myself upright, checked my rifle, an automatic gesture, mechanical as breathing. and made my way to the observation post Orlov had designated. Mikhailov joined me, settling against the wall with a soft grunt. He was old, 40 at least, a veteran of the Finnish war who'd survived when younger, stronger men had died. He'd told me once, in a rare moment of conversation, that survival was luck and nothing more. Skill helped, yes, and training and experience. But in the end, a piece of shrapnel didn't care about your tactical brilliance or your shooting accuracy. It found you or it didn't, and the difference was measured in centimeters and chance. "Quiet tonight," he observed, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. Quiet was relative. In the distance, artillery boomed in irregular rhythm, German guns probably, pounding the positions closer to the Volga. The sky glowed orange toward the north where something was burning. There was always something burning. Sometimes I thought the whole world was burning, and we were simply the last to notice. "You did well today," Mikhailov continued. "Clean shots. No hesitation." "Thank you," I said automatically, though the praise meant nothing. There was no pride in killing anymore, no sense of accomplishment. It was simply something we did to continue existing, as automatic as breathing, as necessary as eating. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "In Stalingrad." "Since November. They brought our division across the Volga on the 18th. I remember because it was my sister's birthday. She turned 15. "You think she got out?" The question was gentle, careful, but it still cut. "I don't know. I tell myself she did, that she and mother and father made it east before the encirclement closed. But I don't know." Mikhailov was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The not knowing is its own torture, isn't it? Worse than knowing the worst in some ways. The mind fills the silence with possibilities, each more terrible than the last." He was right. In the darkness, in the moments between watches and firefights, my imagination conjured endless variations of their fate. I saw them on the evacuation barges, German Stukas diving from the October sky, bombs turning the Volga red. I saw them trapped in a burning building, calling for help that never came. I saw them in a line of civilians, Wehrmacht soldiers sorting them with casual efficiency, determining who lived and who did not. I saw, and I could not unsee, and so I tried desperately not to think at all. "My wife and daughters made it to Saratov," Mikhailov said quietly. "I got a letter in December before the mail stopped coming. They're alive, they're safe, and I will probably never see them again." His matter-of-fact delivery made the words more devastating. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that we'd win, that he'd return home a hero to his waiting family. But we were beyond comforting lies. The truth was visible in every frozen corpse, every ruined building. Every day we held on by our fingernails, while the Wehrmacht ground forward with mechanical patience. "Do you think we can hold?" I asked instead. He considered the question seriously. "Probably not. The Germans control most of the city. We're isolated pockets, each one dying a little more every day. But we can make them pay for every meter. We can make them spend the winter bleeding in these ruins. And that matters, Volkov. Even if we don't live to see why it matters, it does." I wanted to ask him how he knew, what faith sustained him through this grinding nightmare. But before I could form the question, a sound froze us both. The distinctive crunch of boots on frozen rubble, approaching from the northeast. We went silent, rifles ready. The sound came closer, irregular, accompanied by labored breathing. Not a patrol, something else. Mikhailov risked a look through a gap in our fortification, then relaxed slightly. "Ours," he whispered, wounded by the sound of it. He called out the password, changed daily, simple Russian words that a German tongue would mangle, and received the correct response. Moments later, a figure stumbled through the darkness toward our position. It was a Red Army soldier, but not from our unit. His uniform was torn and bloody, his left arm hanging useless at his side. His face was grey with pain and cold. "Water," he gasped. "Please, comrades. Water." I gave him my canteen while Mikhailov went to wake Orlov. The soldier drank greedily, water spilling down his chin to freeze in his beard. Up close, I could see he was young. Younger even than me, perhaps 18. His shoulder was mangled, probably shrapnel. The wound hastily bandaged with cloth that was now frozen stiff with blood. "Where's your unit?" I asked. "Gone," he said simply. "All gone. We were holding the grain elevator. Germans came with flamethrowers. Fire everywhere, the screaming." He trailed off, his eyes seeing something I was grateful I couldn't see. I ran. God forgive me, I ran. "You survived," I told him, though I wasn't sure if I was offering absolution or simply stating fact. That's what matters. Was it? I wasn't certain anymore. The line between survival and cowardice, between tactics and retreat, between duty and self-preservation, it had blurred in this city until I could no longer see where one ended and another began. Men were decorated for holding positions until death. Men were shot for abandoning positions. The difference seemed arbitrary, determined by outcome rather than intention. Orlov arrived, assessed the wounded soldier with a practiced eye. "We can't keep him," he said quietly to Mikhailov, not bothering to lower his voice. The wounded man could hear his own death sentence being discussed. "He needs a hospital, and we can't spare anyone to take him to the river." "I can make it," the soldier said, desperate hope in his voice. "Just tell me where to go. I can make it on my own." Orlov gave him directions to the nearest crossing point, where boats still braved the German artillery to evacuate wounded. It was perhaps 2 kilometers, a journey that might as well have been across the moon, given the soldiers' condition and the German patrols that prowled the ruins. But what else could we do? We had no medical supplies beyond a few bandages. We had no space for a man who couldn't fight. We were 13 men holding an indefensible position in a lost city, and sentiment was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Go at dawn," Orlov advised. "Move slow, stay in cover. The Germans are less active in early morning." The soldier nodded, understanding that he was being sent to die, but at least he'd die moving toward hope, toward the possibility of survival, rather than simply waiting in this frozen basement for the end. He thanked us with pathetic gratitude, as if we'd done him a favor rather than condemning him. After he settled in a corner to wait for dawn, I returned to my watch. Mikhailov rejoined me, and we sat in silence, each alone with thoughts we didn't share. The night ground on with terrible patience. Dawn came late to Stalingrad in January, the sun weak and pale behind clouds that promised snow. I watched the wounded soldier prepare to leave, checking his rifle with his one good arm, gathering himself for the ordeal ahead. He met my eyes before he left, and I saw in them the same question I asked myself every morning. Why am I still alive when so many others are dead? I had no answer for him, no answer for myself. He climbed out through the rubble gap and disappeared into the ruins. I never learned his name, never discovered if he made it to the river or if he died in some frozen courtyard, alone with his wound and his guilt. He became another ghost in a city of ghosts. The day passed in the strange rhythm we'd established. Hours of tense vigilance punctuated by moments of pure terror. German artillery shelled our sector in the afternoon, the concussions shaking loose dust and fragments from our ceiling. We huddled in the deepest part of the basement, while the world ended above us, each man locked in private prayer or meditation, or simply the desperate hope that the next shell wouldn't collapse our shelter entirely. When the shelling stopped, Orlov sent out a patrol to assess damage and look for casualties in the neighboring positions. I went with Yakov and a soldier named Petrov, a farmer from the Ukraine who rarely spoke but moved through the ruins with the uncanny awareness of someone who'd learned to read the landscape for danger. We found 2 bodies in the rubble, Red Army soldiers from another unit, killed by the barrage. We stripped them of ammunition and rations without ceremony or guilt. The dead had no use for such things. Among the scattered equipment, I found a packet of letters, carefully tied with string. Someone's correspondence with home, preserved with desperate care through weeks or months of fighting. I shouldn't have opened them. I knew better. But something made me untie the string, made me read the top letter despite knowing it would haunt me. It was from a mother to her son, dated October 1942. She wrote about the harvest, about his younger brother starting school, about the neighbor's dog that had puppies. She wrote about ordinary life in a village far from the war, about a world where people worried about crops and children and dogs. "We are so proud of you, Alexei," she'd written in careful script. "You are defending the motherland, defending our home and family. Come back to us when you can. We miss you every day." Alexei would not be coming back. Alexei was cooling meat in the rubble, his mother's letters scattered around his body like useless talismans. I gathered them up and tucked them back in his pocket, as if that small gesture of respect meant anything against the enormity of his absence. We returned to our position as snow began to fall, fat flakes that settled on the ruins and softened their harsh edges. Beautiful, if you could forget what the snow was covering, what it would eventually bury. By nightfall, everything was white, pristine, a fairy tale landscape that bore no relation to the hell it concealed. That night, I had the dream again. The factory, the furnaces, Nadezhda's smile becoming a grimace. But this time, there was something new. In the dream, I was both in the factory and observing it from outside, watching myself feed the furnaces with bodies, while somewhere a mother wrote letters to her dead son. The dislocation was profound, disturbing in ways that jerked me awake with my heart pounding. Mikhailov was on watch. I joined him without asking, unable to face sleep again. He didn't comment on my presence, simply shifted to make room. We sat in companionable silence while the wind howled through the ruins, and the distant artillery provided its monotonous percussion. "How much longer?" I asked eventually, not sure what I was asking. "How much longer until relief? Until death? Until the war ended one way or another?" "As long as it takes," Mikhailov answered. "Or until there's no one left to ask the question." It was the only honest answer possible. The Germans came for us on the 3rd day after the firefight. We'd known they would come eventually. We'd killed their men, revealed our position, and the Wehrmacht didn't leave such things unanswered. They came at dawn, a full platoon with machine guns and grenades, professionals who'd learned urban warfare in this city of endless lessons. Orlov had prepared what defenses he could. Tripwires, scavenged grenades, firing positions with overlapping fields. 13 men against 40 in a basement we couldn't retreat from. The mathematics were clear, but we'd known the mathematics were against us since November, since September, since the first German soldier crossed into the city. They announced their arrival with grenades down the rubble gap, concussions that deafened and disoriented. Then they poured machine gun fire into our position, bullets whining off stone, filling the air with ricochets and stone chips. We returned fire, each shot carefully aimed, each bullet potentially our last. The noise was apocalyptic, the smoke and dust choking. Yakov died in the first minutes, a ricochet catching him in the throat. He made a sound like surprise, then toppled without ceremony. I kept firing, mechanical, distant from my own actions. A German appeared at the rubble gap, and I shot him. Another came, and Petrov shot him. They kept coming. Orlov threw our last grenades, bought us seconds, minutes. The Germans pulled back to regroup, and in the temporary silence, we assessed. 5 dead, 3 wounded, ammunition critical. Mikhailov was bleeding from a dozen stone cuts, his face a mask of dust and blood. I couldn't feel my hands, couldn't feel anything except the rifle's recoil and the taste of cordite. "They'll come again," Orlov said, his voice steady despite everything. "When they do, we charge. Better to die in movement than trapped like rats." No one argued. We'd all seen what happened to men who surrendered in Stalingrad. The rules of civilized warfare had no power in this place. We checked our ammunition, a handful of rounds each, and prepared for the end. I thought of Nadezhda, tried to conjure her face, but couldn't see past the present moment. I thought of my parents, of Katya, of the life I'd lived for 20 years before this. It seemed impossibly distant, a story about someone else, someone young and innocent, who'd believed the world made sense. The Germans came again, and we rose to meet them. I don't remember much of what followed. Memory fractures under such extremes, preserving only flashes and fragments. Orlov falling, half his head gone. Mikhailov firing until his rifle clicked empty, then swinging it like a club. The face of a German soldier, impossibly young, impossibly close, as I drove my rifle's bayonet into his stomach. The chaos, the blood, the screaming that might have been me. I found myself somehow outside the basement, in the ruins, stumbling through snow that was no longer white. A bullet struck me. I felt the impact before the pain, a hammer blow to my side that spun me around and dropped me to my knees. I tried to rise, couldn't. Tried again. The world tilted and I was on my back, staring up at the grey January sky. Footsteps approached, crunching through snow. I tried to reach for my rifle, but my arms wouldn't obey. A German soldier appeared in my vision, his Kar 98K rifle pointed at my chest. He was breathing hard, his face smudged with powder smoke. Our eyes met, and for a moment that stretched impossibly long, we simply looked at each other. 2 young men who'd become killers in a city neither of us wanted to defend or capture. He should have shot me. I knew he should have shot me. But something passed between us in that moment, some recognition too profound for words. He lowered his rifle slowly, looked around at the carnage we'd made together, then turned and walked away. Perhaps it was mercy. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion. One more body in a city of bodies. One more death in a battle of deaths. It didn't matter. The cold was returning, seeping back into spaces the adrenaline had temporarily banished. I could feel my blood soaking into the snow beneath me, warm at first, then cooling, then freezing. The pain in my side was fading, replaced by a numbness that was almost peaceful. Above me, the sky was beginning to lighten, the clouds breaking apart to reveal fragments of blue. I thought of the factory, of the furnaces I'd tended with such care, feeding them materials that became steel, steel that became weapons, weapons that became deaths. The circle seemed important somehow, seemed to mean something, but the meaning slipped away like water through frozen fingers. Nadezhda's face came to me finally, not twisted by dreams but smiling, genuine, the way she'd looked on summer evenings by the Volga when the world was young. I held on to that image as the light began to fade, as the sounds of battle grew distant and unimportant. My name was Dmitry Volkov. I was 20 years old. I had been a factory worker, a son, a friend, a soldier. I had defended Stalingrad with whatever was in me to give, had held my position until there was nothing left to hold. Whether it mattered, whether we'd won or lost, whether the battle or the war would be remembered, these questions were for others to answer. I had done what was asked of me. I had endured what needed to be endured. And now, finally, I could rest. The cold took me gently, almost kindly, and I went without resistance into whatever waited beyond the ruins and the snow. The Battle of Stalingrad continued for another 3 weeks after Dmitry Volkov's death. The Soviet 62nd Army reduced to isolated pockets of resistance in the factory district and along the Volga, held on with such ferocity that German commanders reported urban combat unlike anything they'd experienced. Each building was fought over, each floor, each room. The city devoured men and machines with impartial appetite. On February 2nd, 1943, the German 6th Army surrendered. 91,000 men, all that remained of the 300,000 who had entered the pocket. The Soviets had won, though the word won seemed inadequate against the cost. The city Volkov had known was gone, replaced by a wasteland that would take years to rebuild. The factory where he'd worked was rubble. The apartment where his family had lived no longer existed. His body was never identified, never recovered for burial. He became one of countless soldiers, marked simply as missing in the records. One of a million Red Army casualties at Stalingrad, defenders who held the line with their bodies when they had nothing else left to give. History would remember the battle as a turning point, the beginning of Germany's long retreat from the Soviet Union. But history is written by survivors, and Dmitry Volkov was not among them. His story ended in the snow, in the ruins of a city that took his life and gave him nothing in return except the cold knowledge that he had stood when others fell, that he had fought when fighting seemed pointless, that he had mattered in ways that could never be measured or recorded. His mother never learned what happened to him. She waited in Saratov through the spring and summer of 1943, checking the casualty lists with desperate hope, writing letters to military officers that never responded. She died in 1947, still waiting for news that never came. Nadezhda married a factory supervisor in 1945, had 3 children, lived until 1981. Sometimes on winter evenings, she would stand by her window and watch the snow fall, thinking of a young man who'd once walked with her by the Volga, who'd promised to take her to the cinema, who'd disappeared into the war and never returned. The cold that killed Dmitry Volkov eventually released its grip on Stalingrad. Spring came, slow and grudging, melting the snow to reveal the full extent of the devastation. The bodies thawed, were buried in mass graves, became statistics in reports about a battle that changed the war. Life returned to the city, first slowly, then with the relentless determination that characterized Soviet reconstruction. The factories were rebuilt, the streets cleared, the apartment blocks raised again from rubble and hope. But the ghosts remained. They remained still, in the stories passed down by survivors, in the monuments erected to the fallen, in the collective memory of a city that died and was reborn. Among those ghosts walks a young factory worker named Dmitry Volkov, who lived for 20 years and died defending something he could barely understand, whose story is every soldier's story, whose death was one death among millions, and therefore both meaningless and infinitely precious. He had believed once that cold was simply the absence of warmth. He learned differently in Stalingrad, and in learning, in fighting, in dying, he became part of something larger than himself, a sacrifice, a number, a ghost, a defender, a victim, a hero, a casualty, a name no one remembers. A story that must be told even though no one survives to tell it. This is what remains: snow and ruins and blood frozen in winter streets. The factory furnaces eventually roared again, fed by workers who did not know Dmitry Volkov, who built the steel that rebuilt a nation. The Volga still flows past the city, indifferent to the bodies it once carried, the tears it once received. And somewhere in the ruins that have become monuments, in the soil that has become gardens, in the memories that have become history, a 20-year-old factory worker holds his position against the cold, against the enemy, against the inevitable. He holds it still. He will hold it forever.